Hello everyone, welcome to our second video lecture for our series on Sociology of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we're going to be talking about in this video lecture classical sociological theoretical frameworks of innovation. So for this lecture, these are the things that we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about the intersections of capitalism, how it brought about social change that we know now, and how is it correlated with innovation. And then we'll talk about some of the classical sociological people like Marx, Durkheim, Simmel, Sombart, and Weber. And we're also going to talk about Adam Smith, who is also the father of classical economics. For this specific presentation, it's going to be based from the book of Ramella on the first part of chapter 1 from page 16 to 27. So I hope that you are holding that book while you are listening to this video lecture. So as we all know, sociology was born in the 19th century. During this time, the early sociologists were observing a lot of social changes that was brought about by industrialization and also by the birth of capitalism. And as we all know, one of the important thinkers in sociology is Karl Marx, and of course with his colleague Engels, and one of the best critics of the capitalist society came from their work on Communist Manifesto. And I would just like to read one of the passages there. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instrument of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. So basically, what he is saying here is that because the bourgeoisie wants to maintain its place in society as the dominant in society, it has to be able to continue its control over the means of production, and therefore in order for them to be able to maximize the profit, they have to innovate and revolutionize the way they use the means of production and the way they develop the means of production. And as they innovate, they take society along with them. So there are social changes that come with the innovations in the means of production as thwarted by the bourgeoisie. And this basically gives us one of the sociological foundations of innovation, because, like I said, the bourgeoisie wants to be able to maximize their profit and be able to gain as much as they can from their means of production. They will be investing in ways and means for them to be able to maximize the profit, and so they have to think out of the box, they have to innovate, they have to be very creative. And again, like I explained earlier, that creativity, that innovation, in turn, when it becomes mainstream in society, that fosters social change. So when we talk about innovation, we really have to talk about Adam Smith. So Adam Smith is an 18th century Scottish economist, philosopher, and the author who is concerned or considered as the father of modern economics. And basically, he was a pioneer of laissez-faire economic policy, meaning giving as much power to the market, and basically it will be able to foster the development that society needs, and will be able to inspire competition and be able to control the prices and be able to, and of course that competition will be the one that will foster innovation and creativity amongst the people living in that society. And basically most of the earlier works that talk about this economic thought is in the book An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. So for Adam Smith, the wealth of a nation is nothing more than the work that is done in a year, or basically the set of goods produced within the country or acquired externally through trade. Of course, in our current understanding of that would be our gross domestic product. And basically, that wealth of nation will be greater or lesser, and it's based on the relationship between the product and the people who consume those products. So before we can even talk about how Adam Smith alluded to innovation, it's important to talk about how he imagined the productive capacity of a nation. And according to him, there are two parameters to the productive capacity of the nation. The first parameter is the proportion of people in the total population who carry out useful work. The second parameter is that the productivity of workers, namely the competence and dexterity with which they do their work, is also linked to the productive capacity of a nation. And that's the reason why Adam Smith was promoting the division of labor in a society. So according to him, if we would just ask one person to be able to do the production himself or themselves, then they won't be able to create as much as compared to more people working on different aspects of the production process. According to Adam Smith, the division of labor is good because first, it increases the dexterity of workers who specializing in one activity can perform it with greater skill. And we are seeing that more and more today. People are becoming more specialized than ever. So to demonstrate the increasing understanding of specialization and division of labor in our time, let's talk about the marketing department in any organization. Many years ago, decades ago, before the time of social media, for large companies, when you talk about marketing department, they're really just talking about the sales and promotions. But now when we look at the current specialization within the whole marketing department, you have people doing just creatives, and within the creatives team you have people who are assigned solely to specialize on web design, and then you have people who solely specializes on UI, and then you have people who are just specialization on social media management, and then you have people who's doing internal marketing, people doing external marketing, and then of course you have people who are doing linkages and also doing creating MOAs for that organization. So compared to before, our specialization within just the marketing department of an organization became more specialized, because as new possibilities come in, then the tendency is for us to be able to do more, be more productive, then we have to assign people who are specialized in a given activity or skill. Like for example, recently our university had innovated in such a way that it now has a separate organizational affordance for the School of Lifelong Learning, and it's as its own dean. And that kind of organizational affordance, assigning a certain person who is specializing in that specific work to be able to design new programs for continuing education that is separate from other colleges, will increase that productivity. So that's an example of how we imagine how division of labor becomes more specialized. Now, for example, in the field of medicine, used to be you have the EENT, the ears, eyes, nose, and throat. But now the eyes part, they have a specific specialization. They are now ophthalmology, and then the ENT, they are the otorhinolaryngologists. But within that same specialty, there are subspecialties. There are people who are into just cosmetic rhinology, or the ones who do the nose lifts and everything, and then there are those people whose specialization is only on the throat. There are doctors whose specialization is only on the right ear, specialization on the left ear, specialization on the inner ear, specialization on the middle ear, specialization on the neurological structures of the ear. So as society becomes more complex, our imagination of the labor and our division of labor becomes more specialized. And next, it saves time because it is not necessary to switch from one task to another. Let's go back to the marketing department. If it's a small company, and then I remember working in a very small company way back. I was a fresh grad, and I was the marketing person. There was no marketing office, just the marketing person. So I was the one engaging. Of course, it was not a very social media intensive time back then, but it was burgeoning. So I was doing social media. I was making phone calls because phone calls was such a thing way back when. We are doing phone calls, doing the directory phone calls, offering products and services of our company to other companies. And also, I was the one giving out a flyer. So just imagine that, no? If because you, again, like we said, no, when you have lesser people and all of the skills are expected of them, or you specialize in all of this, you're only one person and you only have 8 hours at work. You won't be able to do everything. And if you are able to do everything, you're not able to do everything perfectly, and you're not able to innovate the way you accomplish these things, no, because you're just doing it on your own. And then number 3, it facilitates the invention of new machines, and this is now the correlation, no, of Adam Smith's work on why there is innovation in society, why innovation is favored in society, is because if we are able to delegate some of our more menial work to innovative technologies, then we are able to specialize on more human intensive activities, no? Like for example, if you're a social media manager and you can already delegate your query answering to chatbots instead of you answering all of the magnitude of questions in the messenger or whatever platform you're using, then that would be good, no? So that you'll be able to work on more human, nuanced, intensive work, and you will no longer have to deal with the messages in your messenger for your company, because the chatbots are doing it on your own. Also, in Adam Smith's work, he also offered the concept of the philosophers or the men of speculation. So earlier, he argued that when we are able to relegate some of our activities, our menial activities, to innovations or inventions, then we're able to now streamline our tasks as human. The more human-intensive tasks, we can specialize it. And because we learn by doing, we become better at the work that we're doing when we keep on doing that specific specialized work. And then we relegate some of the more menial work to machines and innovative technologies. But according to Adam Smith, there is a separate group of people within that story that actually identifies what those inventions or innovations will be. And these are, according to that person, philosophers or men of speculation. Probably in our current period of time, these are the academics, these are the inventors, these are the engineers, these are the scientists who are able to create those inventions, who are able to look into that need and develop something out of that need in order to address that need. So, these philosophers, their trade, according to philosophers, and I quote, whose trade is not to do anything but to observe everything, and who, upon that account, are often capable of combining together the powers of the most distant and dissimilar objects. And of course, we know later in our current conversations around innovation that aside from the scientists, the thinkers who are able to see the needs, who know the basic sciences to be able to make tangible products and services out of the need to address those needs. We also have the entrepreneurs who will be part of that research, who will also be part of that research, and also who will be investing, who will be giving capital investment and human investments in order to make that invention go. According to Adam Smith, there are two generative mechanisms that emerge in terms of innovation. The first is an incremental process based on the division of labor, innovation resulting from gradual improvement introduced by persons employed directly in the activity of production. So for example, the teachers during COVID-19, when the pandemic happened and we were abruptly placed to online learning, we had no choice but to be immersed into Animo space or Canvas and be able to work and could deliver pure online learning. And in doing so, in doing this for how many terms already, we have innovated our own ways of delivering this based on what we feel is more effective, what we feel is more cost and effort efficient, and also what we think is also something that is more appropriate and acceptable for students. So that is the first generative mechanism. So as we do our work, whatever labor that we're doing or whatever role we play in society, we have those tendency to innovate the way we do things, to make it easier, to make it more effective, to make it more cost efficient, to make it more appropriate and acceptable. And then the second generative mechanism regarding innovation is the radical process based on the use of theoretical knowledge. Innovations are far-reaching and come from intellectual workers who combine extensive and diverse forms of knowledge. So these are the innovations that are really tangible, those that come into the mainstream, those that shock us, those that disrupt. So probably this would be Spotify when the time that it was introduced into society. This would be Netflix when it was introduced into society. Probably this would also be iPhone during 2007. No, so these are those innovations which were born out of that desire to really innovate, compared to the first one wherein it's kind of more organic. No, we innovate because that is what we do, and we have to innovate the way we do things in order to make it easier, cost efficient, and effective. But this one, we really made this innovation because we want to innovate, because we want to introduce something new in society, because we have the chops, the intellect, and the skills to do it. So this concept of division of labor from Adam Smith, and later we learn from Emil Durkheim, is something that we still use and share even in these current societies. Why? Why is division of labor a practice that is almost universal in almost all societies in our current times? And it's the reason is because in civilian societies, men always require the cooperation and assistance of others. Like for example, we are already in that state that when we need to go from one place to another, we know and we can trust that there is a public utility vehicle that can bring us from point A to point B, and we don't have to drive ourselves. And that public utility vehicle can already trust whoever has created the vehicle, whether that's a jeep or a sedan, or if you're doing Grab, and that person also trusts that there is that application, and the application developers are developing a good software in order for us to be able to move persons from one place to another, whether that be ride sharing or solo riding from one place to another. And that trust is influenced by the systems that we have in place, whether those are formal systems, whether that's a policy that's from a national or a local government unit, or that's a private policy from a private agency, or that could be something that's informal, like a cultural or a social norm. So in civilized society, we expect that form of trust and cooperation with one another in order to make things work. In order for us to do our specific roles, other people have to do their specific roles as well. And that interested cooperation that we have as members of society, plus that consensus that yes, these are what people who are assigned a specific role or ascribed as a specific role, or who achieves a specific role, has to do or has to perform their specific role, then basically that is the basis for the capitalist form of society. Because when there is a need that we cannot have to access, then we have to purchase that need, right? And if there's a need that's out there and the solution is not yet available, then somebody, whether that's an entrepreneur or an academic or a scholar or a scientist, will be able to develop a certain product or service to be able to address that need. And that's the birth of innovation as fostered by capitalist society, which is also grounded on division of labor. And therefore, Adam Smith was known as a person or as a philosopher or as a scientist who does not really believe in technological determinism. According to technological determinism is kind of a philosophical paradigm that looks at societies, or that argues that societies basically change or follow the path of technology. So hard technological determinists believe that, no, and our societies change because our technologies change. But he believes that technologies change because people have a consensus that this should be the technology should be found in society, and thus there's a change. So the change doesn't really come from technology, it is people, because of their consensus, as ascribed by their division of labor, that creates these innovations, that creates these technologies that basically foster social change. So social change is fostered by people through technological innovations. And then let's go back to another classical sociologist. Of course, we know Karl Marx, and he is the founder of the paradigm of conflict theory in sociology. So as a review, conflict theory suggests that a society is in a state of perpetual conflict because of competition for limited resources. And the theory holds that social order is maintained by domination and power rather than consensus and conformity. And of course, we all know that most of the wealth and power is concentrated among the bourgeoisie. And of course, the ones who are oppressed in this story are the proletariat. And of course, this distinction and inequality between the ruling and the working class has been more pronounced because of capitalism and because of the production capacity that is required for capitalism to thrive. And because of that, Marx, as we explained earlier in the beginning of this video lecture, argues that because, like we said, the ruling class wants to improve their means of production for them to be able to get as much profit as possible. Their tendency is to be able to support scientific and technological progress that is aimed towards improving the means in production, decreasing the costs, and increasing the profit for whatever venture that they have. Thus, capitalism and of course conflict theory kind of sees that innovation is bound to happen in a capitalist society. And because of this relationship of the social actors in society in terms of material wealth, that basically explains why people do what they do in a society. Marx is kind of pointing towards technological determinism, meaning that it is the material wealth, material well-being, the technologies that are available during that time that kind of situates the social positions of people in society and kind of identifies the structure and the processes that are found in that society. So Marx kind of alludes to this idea of technological determinism in his work The Poverty of Philosophy, and I quote, in acquiring new productive forces, men change their mode of production, and in changing their mode of production, in changing the way of their earning of living, they change all their social relations. The hand mill gives you society with the feudal lord, the steam mill society with the industrial capitalist. And to just push this further beyond Marx's time, we now have technocrats, because of the birth of social media, the internet. The ones who hold the internet are the ones who kind of dominate society. We have Google, we have Mark Zuckerberg, we have Bill Gates, we have Tim Cook from Apple, and all of these people who have control over the current technology wherein most evolve. And when you look back at who are the winners of COVID-19 pandemic, the winners of the COVID-19 pandemic are those who hold this technological means of production. Zoom, for instance, was one of the winners of COVID-19. So, whatever was the technological need during that time, they kind of define who's who in society, and they also kind of define how society is influenced and society works, and how values are and culture is ingrained or experienced in a society. And we've seen this so much. In the way how we experience truth has been different from the time we didn't have social media to the time that social media was just beginning to the social media that we have now with so much vitriol and fake news. And our idea of credence from the professional to the influencer has also been influenced by the presence of this technology. So that kind of points us to the technological determinism. No? The technology that is most relevant during the time kinds of decides how society will work, and therefore those who own and those who control those technological advances that are most relevant in that society are considered the ruling class or the dominant class in that society. But of course, as we know the story of conflict theory, so in his work A Contribution to the Critique of Political Economy, Marx argues that at a certain stage of their development, the material forces of production in society come in conflict with the existing relation of production. Then comes the period of social revolution. And of course, we've seen this in labor unions and unionizing against the industrial capitalist or the industrial bourgeoisie. But now we are seeing that pushback against what we now know as the technocrats. There's a pushback, and that's the reason why Mark Zuckerberg is trying to change the name of the company to Meta, because of that large pushback. And somehow we get to also these activist movements that we have in terms of data protection, our clamors for the protection of our privacy, is a form of social revolution against the ruling class of the current period, of the current time. Now, to later allude to innovation, Marx starts with the idea that labor is a productive force that creates use values. And according to Marx, there are three things that makes labor a productive force. The first one is that there is a conscious activity which is intended to achieve a goal, that is the work itself. So that's one characteristic of labor. The second one is the subject of the work, meaning who is the work for and what need is that work trying to address, and the instruments of the work. What are the things that we use in order for us to be able to accomplish a given task? So example, for me as a teacher, the conscious activity of teaching and of course following the job description of me being a faculty in the university is the conscious activity intended to achieve the goal, which is the work itself. And the subject of my work is basically the knowledge that I produce as a researcher, as an academic, and also the teachings that I teach to you, my students. And of course, we have the instruments of the work, which of course includes, of course, we have the tangible instruments. So we have, of course, the computer, a keyboard, of course, the classrooms if we are doing in-person classes, the laboratories if I am a science teacher or my work requires laboratory classes, and also more non-tangible instruments like the policies that we need to follow in order for us to be able to function, the procedures that are given to us in terms of preparing activities. Oh, by the way, another tangible instrument of work is the online learning system, the learning management system of Canvas is also that. And then, of course, other instruments for work that are untangible are the CHED orders, all right, the accreditation orders, the quality assurance policies that we need to follow. So these are what makes labor a productive force and the characteristic of labor as a productive force. So this last two represents the means of production, right? And this means of production is where the capacity of innovation can come in. So Marx argues that the labor process takes different forms depending on the historical era. And of course, with the advent of capitalism, it cannot be separated from the process of valorization of capital. So in the event of capitalism, we have what we call a phase called the manufacturing phase, which has its own set of innovations. In the manufacturing phase, we experienced what we call an organizational innovation, wherein, of course, the division of labor is found, and then later on, when we go to Weber, the bureaucratization is found as well. And this is how the productive capacity of labor is increased when we innovate the way we afford things within the organization. When we organize people, the productive capacity also increases. And therefore, because there is that increasing view on the organizational innovation, and of course also the improvement of the means and instruments of production, then there would be the devaluation of the labor force, seeing them as a means towards an end. And that devaluation of the labor force is prompted by the valorization of the capital. So now when the worker progressively gets productive intelligence, then they are separated from the usual artisan farmer or just the worker who are doing menial work, in the manufacture or in the manufacturing, and is concentrated in the capital because they are the ones really improving the means of production, and therefore they are able to develop the machinery to improve the means of production. And with that, we now have the modern industry outside the manufacturing phase. So now we have the modern industry wherein we have now a set of workers whose job is just to be able to suggest new means of production, improving the means of production. Again, this is where innovation comes in as well. And then eventually, if you go back to your jest talk, we know that science had been transformed into a productive force of primary importance in our society, because this is where a new means of production and innovative means of production to maximize the profit and lessen the investment would lessen the cost or expenses would come in, And the age wherein we see more machines working in our society, to produce the goods that we need, the surplus of the goods that we need, is called mechanization. So mechanization is boosted by, one, incentives from the capitalists' principles. Of course, because of capitalism, we want more profit, less cost, and also it is pushed by competition, and we know that competition in capitalism is one of the incubators of good ideas and new inventions. So capitalists, or the ruling class or the owners of production, are incentivized to think out of the box, hire people with productive intelligence, invest in science for them to be able to create new scientific breakthroughs, new products that will address new needs and therefore attract more profit, but at the same time also decrease the costs in creating these products. And also during this time wherein capitalism was starting to become an in thing in our society, and of course when Marx was writing this and sociology was flourishing as a discipline, other disciplines were flourishing as well. So because there is a development of a body of scientific knowledge in different fields for different services and different products, then of course it will increase the mechanization of society as well. And of course, because of that scientific knowledge, we now have an adequate technical basis for a lot of the things that we were doing during that time, that basically improve the productivity of society. But as we know in the story of conflict theory, these experiences and these practices of society are very exploitative and also will need some form of correction when there's a social revolution that happens and people start standing up against capitalists who are abusive. And that's the reason why in most more progressive societies now there are more socialist ideas in terms of making sure that that workers are safe and that everyone is receiving enough developmental opportunities and capacities, and they don't become so dependent on the capital or the capitalist. So, in summary, for Karl Marx, we now understand that the social relations produced by capitalism, basically prompted science and technology to be applied to the production process to deploy their positive effects on profit and means of production. And also, inventions and innovation are not a result of individual ingenuity, but seen as a complex social process. So there's not one individual that can really claim that this innovation happened because of them. And then there is a process of mutual interaction between economy and technology, as well as a number of feedback effects in between them. And then technological and economic innovation is situated within the nexus of power of relationships that trigger conflictual dynamics, which is, of course, a common story that we have when we talk about conflict theory. And of course, that moves us to Emil Durkheim, who is also one of the first thinkers of structural functionalism, which of course believes in cohesion and consensus as the one that drives social relations and social harmony in society. And of course, Emil Durkheim is also a believer of the importance of division of labor in our society. As a review, in ancient society, for hunter-gatherer society and horticultural societies, we have what we call mechanical solidarity, wherein everybody was doing the same thing in order for their small societies to survive. Hunt and gather in order for them to sustain their lives. But as we become more modernized, become more civilized, and more needs outside from our need to survive and eat and drink is becomes a part of our culture, then we have now an organic solidarity wherein people are doing their specialized task, in complement to other specialized tasks done by other people in order to make a consensually cohesive society that is functional, and meets the needs of the people who live in that given society. Emil Durkheim argues that social cohesion in society is a product of uniformity of conscience, meaning we have shared values and beliefs, whether that is formally articulated in policy, laws, or procedures in society, or it could be also informal, something, an ideology that we share, values that we share, passed on from one generation to the next, influenced by different social institutions like the church, the government, and other things. And also, aside from the uniformity of conscience, what makes social cohesion work in a society is the division of social labor, wherein people are doing their specialized tasks in connivance or in complement to other specialized tasks in order to produce a fully functioning society. So, what is Emil Durkheim's take on progress or innovation? So, according to him, in order to produce positive effects or process, division of labor and innovation must go hand in hand. With solidarity and social justice, meaning the things that we have to create, the new things we have to create must be aligned with the values that are already set in society, and with the appropriate qualification, coordination, and motivation of the workers. Meaning, there is an argument that there's a cultural universal that we all want to have better lives, and towards going better lives, we need to progress as a society. We need to find new ways. So there's that general social consciousness, that we want to be better. We want to have an easier life. And therefore, everybody must be in on that, and that whatever innovation is created by people, or group of people, must be in line with the already available values and beliefs and norms in a given society. And this is done by having appropriate qualification, which goes back to division of labor, because there are some people who have more credentials in doing one specific innovation than the other. Like, for example, you would expect, microbiologists, pharmacists, medical doctors to be the ones creating the vaccines, in order to improve our immunity against certain diseases. And you don't expect me, a sociologist, to do that, or you expect engineers to be and probably physical material scientists, to work on let's say urban planning, and then probably you don't expect someone, probably a psychologist would be there, but you don't expect the psychologist to be leading the team, because when you talk about material things, buildings, constructions, there's a specific credence to that. But at the same time, there should be some sort of coordination with other workers. At least in the sciences, we believe, or in the academia, we believe in the interdisciplinarity of things. Like for example, going back to the urban planning, you need the material scientists, the engineers, the traffic, the government, the traffic agencies, to be working hand in hand in order to be able to design and plan the urban spaces in our society. But at the same time, you need social scientists like sociologists, psychologists, to understand how human behavior or humans will be behaving in a given urban space, and therefore give some information on how this could be improved by those who are in the more physical side of the urban planning. And then another contribution of Durkheim in terms of increasing the innovative capacity of people for working, first is that people become more innovative when they are not excessively impoverished. Otherwise, it just generates de-skilling, meaning if people are fatigued in doing their work, if they're feeling burnout with their work, they're not compensated well for their work, then they will most likely will not innovate. And second, there is also a subjective involvement in the work's goals and in teamwork. So meaning, in order for innovation to be considered by the people in a given space or in a given society, then that society also must reward people or incentivize people for coming up with innovative ideas. It has to be in the ideology of the organization or in that community that innovation is something that we want to do. So when an organization has a culture of fostering innovation, people will most likely work together towards creating new innovative ideas. So other classical sociologists that kind of gave us also clues in terms of why innovation is a part of social change, in the conversations of social change, are Simmet and Sombar. So Simmel discussed the idea of social marginality, and who are the people in the margins. These are individuals in groups who are usually not found in the mainstreams of society. It's either they are religiously different from the majority, or they have a certain condition that is not had by the society. They are from a different race, etc., etc. And then the argument is that for these people in the margins to be accepted by the majority, they have to have money, because money is something that can get you accepted in society. And I think that's a sad but true idea. Money is a great equalizer. And therefore, in order for these peoples in the margins to be respected in society, Simmel argues specifically that they should innovate in order for them to be able to be accepted in that majority. They have to innovate, get into services and products that the majority has not thought of, and then probably earn money for that and eventually get more acceptance from the majority. And of course, in science, we have that idea we call the marginal scientists. This is by Jeren and Hirsch, and they argue that in every discipline, they have what they call the marginal scientists, those who use methodologies that aren't really in the mainstream of that science. And then eventually, these people who are treated in the margins are more likely the ones who eventually create the really world-changing innovations as we know it in the present. So some of the marginal people who were able to create really good innovations, of course we don't really have to look far. We can look at Nicolas Copernicus, who at the time was very much marginalized in his society because of pushing that the sun was the center of the universe and not the earth. And now we know that idea, which is innovative during that time and even dangerously innovative during that time, is something that we now embrace. And of course, we have the understandings of classical physics, and now we have the physics that is suggested by Einstein and Hawking, which were universal, which are now universally accepted as well. He argues that the nearness and distance of certain people in a given society when they are outsiders make them more likely to innovate, and we see this in the United States. For instance, there is a high per capita number of PhDs who come from Asian descent. And again, it's something to do with, again, their marginality to that idea or desire they're socialized to be the quote unquote the model minority, and because they are kind of distant from society because of that, especially now during the time of COVID-19, but they're also at the same time near because they are there in that society. Then they are compelled and they are inspired to innovate, to contribute and to be able to see things in a different perspective because they are holding to different perspectives. And this is the reason why, when you I could only speak for nurses, for instance, who go from the Philippines to the other countries who are more developed than ours, and they really find Filipinos to be a bit innovative because we in the Philippines are trained with the lowest form of fidelity in terms of healthcare. We don't have so many. We are trained to hold many patients at a given time, where compared to the developed countries where they hold one patient or two patients at a time. In the Philippines, you can hold up to 10 to 25 patients at a given shift, and then you have lack of resources, right? So when the Filipinos come to the States or in other developed countries and work there, they're considered very innovative because when there is a crisis in developed countries, I remember the story of one of my teachers back then. She said that when a certain medical equipment was down, the nurses who were trained in the States didn't know what to do. They thought it was going to be the end of the patient, or they could no longer transfuse the patient with water, with the liquid that they're supposed to transfuse the patient. And then the nurse taught them, the Filipino nurse taught them, this is how we do it in the Philippines. We didn't have drip regulator in the Philippines, but this is how we do the dripping. So for the nurses, that was for the other nurses who were watching that, it was just innovative. But in the Philippines, it was actually something that we do in a daily basis. So that nearness and distance, and being able to be exposed from one place to another, having that sense of marginality, and I guess also one of the reasons why Filipinos are compelled to innovate and to be creative while they are at work is because they know that they are in the margins. They know their status as immigrants in that society, so they have to work hard to gain a little bit more of assimilation and acceptance in that society. That breeds more innovation, because sometimes it's like that, sadly, we are living that kind of society. We live in a society wherein people in the margins have to prove themselves extra in order to be accepted in society, and that is the room where we kind of innovate. Yeah. And related to what I was just discussing earlier about migrants, Sombart, another classical sociologist, suggested that migrants, in that area of migration studies, also can be a space for innovation studies to happen. And his argument is that migrants possess a social normative and a social cognitive dimension that gives them a higher opportunity for them to be able to innovate. And the first one is social normative dimension. Normative meaning the way of life in the new society that they are in. And of course, trying to marry that with the society that they used to be in prior to immigration. And then we have the social cognitive dimension. Of course, in one culture from the next, there is a difference in the way we use and see knowledge and the way we construct knowledge and our cognitive life world is different from one culture to another. And because of that wanting to marry those different cultural worlds will foster innovation. And, we don't really have to look far. Look at fusion cuisines. Fusion cuisines is an innovative pursuit, right? Because only people who have enough exposure of two different cultures, probably one he has been a migrant in an immigrant in, can really pull off a good fusion dish with an understanding of the historical and the taste palette of each culture for them to be able to really mix and match, no? So that is Sombar's idea on migrants having high capacities for innovation. And so with trying to combine Simmel and Sombar's ideas on innovation, we kind of derived that there are two mechanisms of innovation based on their agreement. The first one is, of course, that sense of marginality, meaning there should be some sense of distance from the current culture you are in that would make you aspire to be able to innovate. It's either for to increase acceptance, or because you feel you just have to your personal aspiration to be able to meet the two cultures together. And also the second one is brokering, and this is very important because we always talk about, like, when you talk about the science community, the margins are women, no, the margins are LGBTQIA people, and that's the reason why, you talk to a woman scientist, you talk to an LGBTQIA scientist, and they will always tell you that, I have to work extra hard because this is a man's world, and in order for me to be identified and to be more recognized in society, I have to work extra hard compared to a man who'll get it more, but doesn't really have to do the same effort as this scientific margins would be. And that's the importance of brokering, meaning trying to promote your work, and when you are from the margins, there's an extra effort for you to broker the work. It's just nice now that compared to the many eons ago, in centuries ago, there is now an increasing movement to kind of decrease the gap in terms of scientific innovations and scientific recognitions between women and men, right? And also LGBTQIA and cisgender counterparts, cis heterosexual gender counterparts. So I think aside from being marginal, it's also the brokering part, the promotion of that innovation that will also give recognition. And next we move to Weber, who is a fan of the modern form of capitalism, describes the modern form of capitalism as a rational calculation of capital. So I think rationality is something that is big for Weber in terms of talking about modernization, and then separating self from less rational institutions, like, for example, religion and family. And then a predictable institutional organization. So Weber also kind of promoted bureaucracy as one of the ones that increases productive capacity in a modern society. And number 3, the perennial renewal of technology and the use of science as a production factor. And this is basically where we find in this 3, there is also space for innovation, but number 3 is the one that has the most use of innovation, because we now have increasing reliance over science and the scientific method. So this is where we found most of our innovation. So basically, because of the growth of science and technology during the time of modernization, it emancipated production of goods from link with tradition and bound it with rational free thought. So of course, I so much respect traditional ecological knowledge, but just observing, there is now in terms of agricultural sciences, for instance, there is lesser reliance on, for example, praying to the gods in order for them to give rain and good crops, but really using scientific and technological interventions in order to improve the crops. And then number two, it made a systematic lowering of production costs possible by promoting a feverish hunt for invention. So again, that is what we want, no? And again, one of the most cost efficient and the most coefficient forms of inventions that we have seen in the last century are plastics. These are cost effective, right? And then it was a foundation for more inventions to come. Our earlier and our cheaper cell phones are made from plastics. There's nothing. You go to a space in any room, you'll see something that's made up of plastic. So, and plastic has made things more durable, more lighter, and also decrease production costs. But of course, we know later that it is a very unsustainable and is a cause of many of our environmental problems. The ascetic religious origins of Weber also kind of alludes a lot to the promotion of innovation in society. So, as you know, in your early sociological subjects, that Weber is a devout Calvinist, no, and he was sometimes even called as a prophet of Calvinism because he was really, in his work, he really tied the basic ideologies of Calvinism and its relation to how capitalism and modernization should be. And according to Weber, Calvinism was the spirit of capitalism. And basically, just to review and also allude it and connect it to why innovation is needed in society, one is that, of course, Calvinism is a form of ascetic Protestantism. Basically, frugality is something that is celebrated as an acceptable social value within that religion. And at the same time, you're supposed to really increase your profits and not spend too much, and that is what will make you be elect in the heavens, and for eternal salvation. And also, another important norm that is promoted by Calvinism is the engagement in professional activity. So if you are masipag, if you are hardworking, industrious, that, as instruments of God's work, we are pleasing in God's eyes. That is the work of the faithful in Calvinism. And that's very much also connected to our modern view of capitalism. If you work hard, if you produce money, then you are a formidable person. You are an admirable person. You are doing the work of God, and then according to Calvinism also, in the ascetic religious origins of Weber, is that the success in the business ventures that we do is what will ensure us the eternal salvation, and again, go now to success in business. And when you look about how we consider successful businesses, how we imagine successful businesses, these are the businesses that are innovative. And if you are practicing asceticism, frugality, increased profits, lowest expenses, then you need to innovate. You need to think out of the box. How do you get most profit? How do you get most of the work done with little effort, with little investment, with little expense? And therefore, that's the reason why, even in the spirit of capitalism, these religious roots of capitalism, as suggested by Weber, is also promoting innovation. Because in order for you to have success in business, you have to innovate. And if you innovate, you'll be successful in business. If you're successful in business, you will have eternal salvation. Another idea that Weber pushed as a precursor to innovation is the rupture with economic traditionalism, especially if the economic traditionalism involved magic, spirits, etc. And for so long a time, many centuries ago, economic traditionalists were opposed with any forms of economic innovation. And this is something that's expected, when you have a new idea that disrupts your centuries long and generations long of ideas passed on by oral history, and it would really be met with resistance. And then, of course, still clinging on the ascetic religion idea, which Weber feels that should be kind of commonly held by everyone. There is that idea we call the vocational professionals, that your profession is also your vocation. So if you do your vocation well and you excel in it and you innovate in it, then you are more likely to get eternal salvation. And going back to the importance of rupturing economic traditionalism to really put forth really usable economic innovation, there should be some form of charismatic mechanism for innovation, because he argues and he worries that those who innovate are more likely going to be met with a lot of resistance, will be ridiculed by people, and then the story of Copernicus, who even had himself excommunicated because of his then wild beliefs, which we now know as a commonplace in scientific knowledge, that the sun is the center of the universe. So the person who identifies this new innovation that is disruptive of the current innovative activities, the current activities that is done in the economic traditional setup, has to have that really strong resolute, has to have that form of charisma to really be able to put the innovation out there. So these are the two things that Weber kind of contributed in the conversations of innovation. One is the importance of looking at the spirit of capitalism from the vantage point of Calvinism, which he believes as a rational form of religion that we can all cling on. And then number two is the importance of dismantling the economic traditionalism, which was generations long held beliefs that were really related to magic and spirits in terms of explaining the things that they did instead of logical work. And the importance of having an innovator who's charismatic, who has a really strong resolute to be able to push forth economic innovation and be able to dismantle the non-rational beliefs that was held by traditional societies. So in this video, we were able to talk about different classical, sociological, and economic theoretical frameworks of innovation. So we talked about Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Adam Smith, Simmel, and Sombart, among many other things and their ideas.